John Clokacher from the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, and Dan Forrester from the Archery Trade Association. John Zinnel talked about the use of allowing turkey 28 gauge and 410 turkey loads in spring turkey seasons, and kind of how the advancement in load development and cartridge development has made that possible. Some of the other case studies he briefly mentioned were Federal's Fire Stick muzzleloader, the use of 223s in big game hunting and crossbow hunting, as well as archery restriction on poundage. And that led nicely into Dan Forster's talk about the work ATA has done to get rid of, I guess, the limitations on poundage requirements for archery hunting. And then John from Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation talked about his work on Sunday hunting, particularly in his home state of North Carolina, but trying to get those overturned to allow the hunters to spend more time, more of their season in the woods hunting. So those were the three main topics. I briefly wanted to talk about a topic related to R3 that I've worked on in my previous role. I was the collegiate coordinator for backcountry hunters and anglers, and engaged on the issue of non-resident college students being able to purchase resident licenses. And this was a very important issue to me personally. I grew up in New England and came out west to Colorado for my undergrad, and I really started hunting during my undergrad, and that I can very much say that those experiences led me into the world of conservation, and had I not been able to do that, I would not be doing this today. And that was made possible through, as a non-resident college student in Colorado, after 6 months, if I'm a full-time student, I am considered a resident when it comes to hunting and fishing. And so I was able to purchase those licenses at, at a very affordable price. Whereas, a non-resident license is in the upper hundreds to low $1,000, depending on your species and whatnot. And coming to Montana, where I am now working with the University of Montana students and Montana State students, we actually have seen, Montana used to not allow students to be considered residents. They changed it, and then they switched it again, and they're the only state in the U.S. that has a discounted license, but it's $550, and many students consider that to be a barrier. And so, this is an area that I've worked on that I see directly related to R3. I don't have the most up-to-date numbers, but I believe it's 21 states currently do not offer a discount or consider students residents, while 28 states across the U.S. do consider college students, non-resident college students, residents when it comes to hunting and fishing. And I'm happy to answer questions about that as we move forward and have some resources there. But I just wanted to touch on that as one other issue. So, now I'd really like to kind of jump into the discussion portion of this and kind of, I guess, start off where all of you see areas where policy could help advance or assist the R3 movement in your work. And I've got a few follow-up questions, but I think we'll start off with that. So if you want to jump in, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself, and we'll start there.
Hey, I just wanted to throw it out there that you have probably already seen, but the Great American Outdoors Act was signed into law by the president yesterday. So that's a cool little bit of policy that we're watching kind of unfold right in front of our eyes. And I'm interested, Sawyer, are you very familiar with that? Can you do you have any ideas or conversation pieces about what we might see from that in the future?
Sure. You know, I've worked a decent amount on the Great American Outdoors Act in some of my other contract roles, and I assume everyone's pretty familiar with it, but if not, the two big pieces of that are fully funding the Land and Water Conservation Fund to its $900 million per year, which I believe it was started in 1964, and in its lifespan, it's only been fully funded twice. The money from LWCF has touched every county in the United States, and as hunters often cite, the number one barrier to entry for them is access. And so LWCF is a program made to partner with states to kind of provide matching funds for land acquisition. And so that's a huge component for access across the U.S. And again, every county it goes from. Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation has used it here in Montana for helping with land purchases, but it also goes to developing ball fields and playgrounds and pools in our cities. So it's very broad reaching. The other component of the Great American Outdoors Act that is huge is the maintenance backlog, and want to make sure it's in the media it's being really talked about our national parks, which they have huge national or a huge backlog, but it's also to help with Forest Service, BLM lands, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the backlogs on our refuges and those. And that can go everything from updating trails, Forest Service roads. There's a huge, incredible piece of access there, and I believe that's $1.5 billion to address those issues for 5 years. So an exciting piece that is kind of indirectly related to R3.
Awesome, thank you.
I know LWCF dollars, I think it's in Mexico, Lance, that shooting ranges have been funded by LWCF dollars as well. That's the picture I've seen used most. Okay, so guys, sorry.
Yeah, so I guess as I want to spur some conversation here, and again, if you have any ideas where you think policy could help advance the R3 movement, please jump in. I guess more specific, I believe Lance, you're on here, and Samantha mentioned you've done a lot of work with apprentice licenses and their effectiveness. Wondering if you might be willing to talk a little about that.
Sure. You catch me right in the middle of working on a big piece of that project. Here in New Mexico, we're working to try to change our mentored youth program to reduce our minimum age to 8 and to add pronghorn as an allowable species under that program. Basically, our mentored program allows a student to have 2 license years to try it before you buy it without having the full hunter education requirement attached to it. With that said, we do require that they take an abbreviated test to comply with our state statute and our rules and regulations, but fairly simple to get into and run with. What I have been surprised to learn and find out as I've worked through that program and evaluating it is that we have roughly about 56% of those who participate in the program complete their hunter ed requirement. What I've been most impressed with is that, well, it's not a huge number, and admittedly, the first 2 years of the program when we did not have age restrictions and we did not have species restrictions was the boom years for the program. And the last 4 years have, in its totality, have not amounted to the same number of participants we had that second year, which was the peak year. But with that said, those 56% that do participate and finish the program, What we've seen is that they are buying on average an additional 7 licenses following graduation from Hunter Ed. That's a really good number when we look at some of the past studies that show us that just Hunter Ed graduates in general, only about 1 in 3 go on to purchase additional licenses following graduation of a program. So it's proven to us that it's a good retention tool, and that's really kind of key. It's really the driving force behind our pursuit to get some of those regulations reduced and rolled back to something a little bit more similar to what we started with, and increase that participation. You know, we do have the typical questions and concerns that come up regarding the safety of those individuals. And, you know, again, hunting still is the second safest activity out there, hunting with firearm. Most accidents occur in a tree stand. That's really not something that we deal with much in New Mexico. We don't have much tree stand hunting. And so that kind of crushes that. In addition to that, you do have those individuals who I would have to say kind of selfishly think that if you have this mass influx of youth that you're going to take away their draw opportunities. And what we found out is really what we're talking about in that age group is only about 11% of our total draw applicants are youth 17 and under, and less than 0.5% are youth 9 and under, which is where I'm targeting some growth. And that's nothing when you consider the bigger picture of trying to recruit that next generation into hunting, and the support and money that they'll generate over the course of their lifetime for an agency like ours.
Awesome. Thanks, Lance. Looks like we may have just lost our host, but that's okay. So it looks like, or it sounds like y'all are doing some really great things in New Mexico. And I know there's a lot of opportunity out west, especially with some of these policy things that are coming about with PR Mod and Great American Outdoors Act. I think those have some potential to do really great things out west where there's just a lot of land. And then there's the MAP Act too, which I'm not sure how prevalent that is on most of y'all's radars, but basically it would open up some land that is landlocked by private land so that you would be able to actually access some of those landlocked areas. So that's pretty cool. Maybe when Sawyer comes back, he can tell us some about the MAP Act. But until we get there, oh, Samantha, did you have something?
Yeah, I did. Well, so the point about Lance's efforts, you know, it's data-based to drive the policy. What we're learning in policy efforts is that, you know, you have 2 efforts that get it moved forward. It's land or data-based, which means you're pulling stats from licensed trends. For us, it's also it's often number recruited or opportunities increased. Kristen, you were talking about the MAP Act. That's about acres opened up, right? So a lot of our successful policy efforts have been data-based. If you think about the ATA project, it was Dan going through all the license and regulations for each state and figuring out the standard so that he had a data point to compare to. So we've learned that that is a critical part kind of as we move forward. The other side of it though has been where or who is championing these data points and these policy efforts. And something Sawyer and I had talked about prior to this is kind of where the ideas for the policy changes come from. And maybe we'll start there, but then following up, how can they be championed by your partners and not just the agency alone? So Sawyer, did you want to chat maybe and lead the conversation about where the policy ideas come from?
Yeah, so, you know, I kind of in my own experience, I have probably done a few related to the college student licenses, had some learning experiences where I probably went about it the wrong way the first time, but it's been valuable in learning the importance of building consensus and strong partnerships. And so, I was coming from the nonprofit world. Obviously, they're here in Montana to create that change in regulations. There's a commission component to it. There is a legislative component. There's the other nonprofit interests. And so I think those but from the nonprofit side, really learned how important it was to approach things a lot slower than I, probably wanted, but build that consensus, have those, I guess, foundation laying conversations, and going from there. So I think there's ways to tactfully do it where, that lead could come from not necessarily for me, from a nonprofit side, it could come from the commission, and it might be much better in terms of like public perception and opinion and buy-in, as well as partner buy-in, coming from that way. So thinking about how you're doing it, and I don't know if anyone has experience creating some policy change that they could speak to.
I'm a passionate person about this topic, but I know in my experience, something from the hailed land of Pennsylvania, the culture stopped a lot of policy efforts from moving forward. And it's something I learned from a former supervisor who happens to be on the call, who has a background in human dimensions and has withstood some of those research efforts and trying to collect input on the decision to push policy efforts forward or not. And Corin, I don't know if you have ability to chat, but can you just maybe share about how you've conveyed those policy efforts like Sunday hunting or minimum ages like Lance is dealing with, and how you've done the surveys of the general hunting public to provide data points for you to help push that forward or not on behalf of the agency? So she went off and then she came back on.
Okay, I'm here. Can you just repeat that one time? You just went in and out a little bit for me, so I apologize. And I was getting some of my stuff ready for my son. So if you can, I heard most of it, but just reiterate that, and I apologize. I wasn't quite ready to be talking here.
You're fine. Can you share on the different surveys you've done of the hunting public in Pennsylvania to kind of provide data points and help champion, or at least provide insight for the agency on different policy efforts that have been brought up to the agency, like Sunday hunting, minimum age changes, Saturday openers, just that aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, we do loads and loads of surveys here, and, we try to provide different data points. And I think it's always really important that, they use human dimensions as a guide and not necessarily primarily, I think that it's something that's important. But even as the human dimension specialist, I always want things to be in the proper context, especially in the cases like CWD. I think it's really, really important to, stick with what is most important, what is ideal biologically. But yeah, we do things with Sunday hunting all the time, and, it's very interesting to our commissioners because this year, for the first time, we are having 3 Sundays for hunting, and that was something that came up in the legislature. But I think we were able to get places because we always had an overwhelming amount of support for that with, from our hunters, as one would expect. Maybe it's not as much as you would expect, but we were typically able to find where the differences would lie, that, it was often, our older hunters who were against it. People who lived in rural areas were less likely to support things like Sunday hunting. Our Saturday opener was very similar. People who like the tradition of a Monday opener were ones who typically were older, lived in rural areas. And I think there's a couple reasons. I think that there's maybe a traditional aspect to it, but also I think if you live in a place where it's really easy to go hunting, you don't need those Saturdays the same way. Like you could come home from work on a Tuesday and still have time to hunt, but if you live in a, you know, more urban area, until you get home, you fight traffic, do all those things, it's almost certainly dark, especially during the times of year that one hunts. So there's always important things to look at, I think, from a whole standpoint, but then also really getting a sense of individual data points. And I think those have always been really, really useful for our commissioners. I'm asked virtually every commission meeting to present some sort of survey data if I have it for, you know, the particular. It's always just tough to know ahead of time really what they want to see. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Appreciate it. Sir, did you just hop off again? Yeah. No, you're here. Okay, there you go.
Looks like Eddie has a question or a comment. Eddie?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was more just a comment, just to piggyback on what Warren was talking about. You know, just in the Northeast, I think we have some specific challenges that policy could certainly help us overcome, things like Sunday hunting and, you know, a lot of issues with like local firearm ordinances. And, you know, in the county that I live in outside of Richmond, you know, there's a law in the books that I'm not even allowed to discharge a bow and arrow at all, even if you're in your backyard or even if you have 100 acres. So it's interesting that I think, you know, and I'm starting to play a little bit more active role in this, is I think there needs to be good relationships with a lot of stakeholders, but a lot of times the loudest stakeholders are the ones with the most energy on a topic. You know, they tend to reside in less suburban and more rural areas. So it's hard to get like a common voice or a group to rise up to advocate for, you know, overcoming some of the issues that a lot of hunters face because they live close to a lot of other people, if that makes sense. So, you know, I think that was one of the things that really has pushed Sunday hunting forward in a lot of states, is because they, you know, groups where people, citizens had a voice, and there was a lot of energy behind that, and that might be tough to pull together if say those groups don't necessarily want something to happen. So
Yeah, good point. And I saw this a lot when I was working in North Dakota, and that's that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And it doesn't necessarily always come out to be what the greatest amount of people want, but the most vocal people often are the ones that drive policy. And so you bring up some really good points about, you know, how can we do a better job of facilitating our community and our states and the public to vocalize their needs rather than just the ones that are already vocal, because often it's a vocal minority. And I think Sawyer is back.
Yep, I'm here.
Welcome
And
back.
that unifying message almost from the Great American Outdoors Act probably hit that home the most for me, was the everyone from influencers to, you know, niche outdoor groups like, you know, our RMEFs and our other hunting organizations, but then also land access, land trusts. There's many different parks and recs too, just a unified message of past this is why we need it. And wow, that's like a national issue and a national example. I wonder, has any state built a coalition around one issue in their state? Sunday hunting, maybe for the New England states, has been the unifying message, but what are some of the other examples out there that people have gotten engaged in?
South Dakota just had a policy change about extra youth days for pheasant hunting. And that was actually brought to the table by a teenage girl. So that was really cool. She went all the way up the chain of command and got that changed with the legislature.
At 13, I think she was too.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty awesome. I'm thinking about the Western states, sir. I know you hail from Montana. I'm biased always. I'm an East Coast native and probably always will be, but What about some of our other states on the call here? We have Justana, you're New Mexico, right? Washington, Utah. What are some of the other policy issues that you guys are dealing with?
And Flora, I know you're not working in California right now, but you have before, and California obviously is very contentious as far as policy goes. So I'm kind of extra curious to hear your voice in this conversation.
Yeah, I was just wondering if anyone was on from further west. I have to say, every time I currently live in Wisconsin, and every time, and the hunting is great here. There's I don't know if this is true for other states, but there's an early mentored hunt season. You can go out early. So when I learned to hunt for turkey, my mentor got to take me out before opening day. You get the whole place to yourself, and that was fantastic. But every time I go into Cabela's, I always get crap from people for being from California. They see it on my license, and it pulls up in the background check. So now as I prepare for my move back to California, I'm starting to read up on regulations. I think there's difference. I know there are differences in how you transport your firearm. I did find a really cool type of hunting license I can buy that is a lifetime pass, it seems like. I really don't know how common that is in most of states, and maybe it's just because I am a new hunter, but I'm totally just going to spend the money on that and get it. My husband also fishes, so he's going to get the combo license. And just like that, we're essentially lifetime supporters of that in California. I'm really excited for that.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I think most states have a lifetime license. I'm not sure about that, but all of the ones I've worked in have had a lifetime license option. So yeah, it's a good deal.
Yeah, it's easy. And I have to say, just from the perspective of new hunters, that's something you don't want to have to think about necessarily. Can I just get an annually renewed subscription type thing? So when the season rolls around, all I have to do is clean my gun and get outside.
Awesome.
I think you were going to share an idea.
Yeah, Matt, did you have your hand up? Go for it.
Well, I guess the lifetime license thing, I don't know who's or what listserv it was, but there's a listserv, and I don't know if any of you were on it, but it was asking about the lifetime licenses, and it was interesting seeing all the different states ping in about if they have it or not. Not as many as I thought did. I know Utah, we had it for a little bit and then we stopped. So there's like this small section of hunters that are out there and anglers. But yeah, that was interesting. It'd be cool to see someone go through and summarize all that just to get an idea of the full extent of that. But what I was gonna just add, I don't really have a lot to add with the whole policy discussion, but thinking about our policy, I might be a little bit lower to really know what kind of policies the different, our wildlife and aquatics folks are trying to push through. I think of like the programs, like Lance was talking about the trial hunter program, like Utah's got that, and I guess I don't really consider that a policy, but it kind of is. But yeah, so I don't know, I'm not really cued into the policies, but the programs I know a little bit about, and we're not nearly as good as Lance is over there. Our percentage of participants that go through that trial hunter is about 15% that actually go on and take the full hunter ed. And I'm not, I don't know, I wasn't around when we started that program or kind of a push for it, but yeah, and then just other stuff that I think is good that's kind of similar is, we have the youth only hunts and that kind of stuff, but like I said, I don't really always consider that policy because it doesn't have to go too far up. It just goes to our sometimes to our regional advisory councils and that kind of stuff. But that's all I really had.
I see Brian from Colorado mentioned the work that he's engaged on regarding policy regulation changes that allow turkey, deer, and elk pronghorn licenses made available for youth and novice outreach hunts that are led by staff and volunteers from CPW. Brian, I'm curious how that's kind of how that work is, those regulations changes have occurred, and kind of relating back to the public perception and public support aspect. Have you guys encountered any obstacles there?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of the work was done before I got into the position, but we've been working on some changes to the policy. In Colorado, most of our big game licenses are limited, so you have to apply through the draw process. There's some over-the-counter elk tags, but in order to make it easy on our outreach program, we've actually had regulations changed, and we can allow a certain number of youth tags, certain number now that this is a recent change, is novice adults to get a limited license, and there's constraints associated with it as well. But we haven't had any issues from the public or concerns about the public. Most of our hunts are going to be on private property. Once in a while we can hunt on public land, but when we're doing outreach hunts, we're able to contain some of the safety issues. We've got, if we got access to private property. So we've actually got pretty good support from a lot of agencies. We get some sponsored organizations. So pretty much any nonprofit organization, Pheasants Forever applies for some tags as well. Outdoor Buddies, which reaches out to youth that are disabled or maybe have a relative that's disabled. So we're able to provide hundreds of licenses every year to hunters. It's kind of the basis of a lot of our big game outreach and some turkey tags. So so far it's been a great program. We just had to get it through the regulation so we can get access to these limited licenses. Does that help at all?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for sharing. I see Tom from Washington mentioned that they have a hunter ed deferral program, essentially try before you buy. And they've posted some details there if anyone wants to check that out. One thing I'd be curious to hear thoughts from people. We've encountered it here in Montana every year, and I think this is a different issue in the West than it is in the East, but especially with like crossbows. Crossbows could be a great intro and tool in the R3 movement, but it's also, you kind of get into the ethics aspect as well as the public support regarding crossbows in the archery season, particularly here in the West. And I know there was that Fire Stick article from Federal that I had shared on some various council social media platforms, and there was some discussion about does this really belong in a muzzleloader season? And just curious to hear if people have dealt with that public acceptance and how you walk that fine line between it's good for the R3 movement, but there's an ethical component to it in kind of the traditional hunting methods and whatnot. So I don't know if anyone has thoughts on there. Would they be willing to jump in and provide some thoughts?
So Tom offered some more information in the chat about some of the things they're doing. So Tom, if you want to speak up about that, that would be cool. If not, that's also fine.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Because I was having some internet issues here in a second ago.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so the Hunter Ed Referral Program is actually pretty cool, and it was something I took advantage of with my oldest daughter And I posted a link to that, which is easier to scan that page than have me reiterate the whole thing. But essentially, you can take a first-time hunter who hasn't completed hunter ed out hunting, kind of a mentored hunt situation where you have someone who is qualified taking someone who's new, and that way they don't have to go through the whole hunter ed program to see if it's something they even want to do. That's been very successful. Dave Whipple from our state is the hunter ed division manager. He's not on this call, but he's been with the agency probably 30 years and has a lot of background on what we're doing around hunter education and using our master hunter program as well to help with mentorship. So in a future call, maybe I'll see if I can get him to join. And then as far as license packages, that was something the agency started before I got there with this Fish Washington package. Naturally, Washington is surrounded by a lot of awesome opportunity for fishing, freshwater, saltwater, everything from tuna to, trout and muskie and all kinds of stuff. Like you name it, we have it. So this package essentially allows you to kind of do a once and done, buy the Fish Washington package, and it gets you all this great opportunity. And that's been very, very successful. It just, I can't even tell you how much money we brought in with that package alone. So after I joined the team and we started looking at other package ideas, we came up with this Get Outdoors package that is kind of a hunting and fishing, kind of the whole kitchen sink kind of a package. It doesn't include everything because there's some stipulations in there that don't really allow it to work that way. But we were able to get a large proportion of our licenses all packaged up in one convenient $236 package that if you were to buy it early in the license year, like say April 1st is when our license year starts, that's going to get you, spring turkey tags. It's going to get you all your fishing, your hunting in the fall, upland bird and turkey, all of it. And it's going to save you about $112 if you compare that to buying all those licenses individually. So it's a substantial savings. Naturally, the later in the license year, if you were to buy that, you're missing out on certain opportunities because some of those seasons are closed by the time you buy it. But interestingly, with COVID, we are consistently selling those things. I was just pulling up my status report from last month, and let's see, on that Get Outdoors package, let me see here really quick if I have it in here. We've sold 3,500 of those licenses for a total of $735,000. That was as of June. So from April to June, we brought in $750,000 essentially on that package. The other thing we're looking at is the data around that. So how many of those people were regular purchasers and how many were first-time purchasers? And I don't have those numbers right at hand, but interestingly, a lot of the people, or a decent number of those people who purchased that Get Outdoors package had never bought a license before, which to me is just crazy because, even I was like, okay, I'm not a big upland bird hunter because I live over on the coast and, I don't want to drive 5.5 hours or whatever to go pheasant hunting or chukar hunting. But,
And that was a great point. Sorry, Tom, we lost you. Okay. Well, while we lost him, I'm just going to say it. Hurricanes are ravaging the East Coast, so that's what's going on. I don't know what's going on the West Coast. So I'm just going to say that Mother Nature and Zoom aren't getting along this week. We'll just leave it at that and just let it go. Sawyer, I know you had mentioned about the ethics question, and one of the things I just pulled up was a position statement that Cope and Young had just put out about trail cameras that use cell phone positioning, and basically they send pictures when the animals are there to your cell phone. They text it, and they talk about the comparison of the fair chase rules. And I think that's kind of where you were going with the ethics side of it. So I know we were discussing different examples, so maybe that's another way you can kind of explain your point a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I was, my example was with crossbow seasons, particularly here in the West. It seems like every year in Montana, there's a movement in the legislature to try to introduce crossbows into the archery season. The Pope and Young Club has a very clear position statement on that crossbows shouldn't be considered part of archery only seasons. And it's a very heated and opinionated question. I personally don't think they have a place in archery seasons, but they also, can be a tool in the R3 movement. And so I'm just curious how you go and navigate that and kind of that fine line of, this could have a lot of great benefit for getting new hunters, for recruitment, reactivation, but you have to walk a certain line there. And just curious if anyone has any examples of dealing with that specifically in their work.
So Sawyer, I'm curious, you say that you don't think crossbows have a place in archery season. Do you think they fit better in like rifle season just because of the speed and impact?
Yeah, I think the distance, there's the distance that a effective crossbow can be effective out to is a lot greater than, I think most hunters using a recurve or a compound bow. I don't know if they necessarily belong in a rifle season, maybe a season of their own. And again, on the East Coast, I think it's a little different when you get into urban areas. They can certainly be a valuable tool there. But for myself, out hunting elk during the rut, if someone's using a crossbow and I'm using a compound or a recurve bow, I think that kind of classifies as an unfair advantage. But that's, again, I'm opening up a can of worms here, and there are lots of opinions. But
okay, so just classification. That's interesting.
Yeah.
What are other states doing with crossbows? Because I know it's not like a blanket approval with them yet, although it looks like it may go that way. So those of you working in states with or without crossbow regulations, what are y'all seeing?
This is Craig. Can I just add a piece on this crossbow topic? So I had the same opinion as Sawyer about 2 years ago. And what I've since learned is that my opinion was very biased and uneducated. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I had the opinion that a crossbow was like picking up a rifle and shooting it. What I found out last year when I actually shot a crossbow for the first time, and granted, I grew up archery hunting, compounds, longbows, recurves, you name it. And what I found from my personal experience is that a crossbow really does not shoot any farther than a compound bow. In New Mexico, we've got archers that are killing antelope at over 100 yards with the compound bow. And my experience with my crossbow is that if you don't shoot that crossbow at different yardages, no different than a regular archery gear, they really don't have a more effective range than a modern day compound. The one thing they do have that is an advantage is that their bow is cocked already, and there's no duration for holding the string back. It's infinite. So that is definitely an advantage on the crossbow, but I've kind of changed my opinion on them just based after my experience with actually hunting with them. So just wanted to add that.
I appreciate that. And, that's, I think, just helps illustrate, the point of including including the public in these decisions. So, we're avoiding the bias because obviously, there's, from my opinion, I fully admit I've never used a crossbow, so I'm uneducated about it. So, obviously, again, bringing in the public and diverse viewpoints is incredibly important as we engage on these policy issues.
And I wanted to share one of the things that, in my experience in policy efforts that we've done, in that I think our partners have done well to help us in these conversations, is to look at fact sheets or white papers. So you might reach out to the organization. So if it's Habitat Access, Pheasants Forever is your team, right? Or Rough Grouse Society. NSSF has tons of position statements from the firearms perspective and the industry perspective. I think ATA is building towards that way as well with the recent work with archery equipment. And then Boone and Crockett and the Pope and Young have position statements too. So if you are encountering kind of policy suggestions, or your commission, which is probably the best example, comes down and says, I got an idea, these white papers serve as a really helpful tool to say, well, here's what other people are thinking about it. I know I was trying to find the link to it. New England Northeast, Gordon Batchelor had worked on some efforts to kind of get some language around R3 efforts too, and the value of them. So if I find the link, I'll share it. It was there, it's gone now, but it's just because things change and something related to COVID, I'm sure. So I see some of the comments here too, Sawyer. I don't know if you have a chance to see them. Would you like me to read them?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so Brian, posthumous? I always see it. Okay, good. That's solved as well. In Colorado, archery and muzzleloader seasons are promoted as a more primitive experience. However, we allow crossbows or handheld bows by hunters that hold a rifle tag. They still have to wear blaze orange or pink in the field when using your crossbow. Okay, and Tom Rowell says the crossbow doesn't meet the ASTM standard for a hunting bow because it's mechanically held at full draw. Tom, what does that mean? American standard for?
Yeah, so this gets really technical really fast, and not, it's, again, not really based on any personal opinion. I think there's obviously a lot of controversy around hunting bows, but back in the mid-90s, I worked with Norm Mullaney, who some of you might know the name, but he was the he's a mechanical engineer with Peterson's Bow Hunting Forever. I worked with him and Dave Holt from Bowhunter Magazine, their technical editor, and there was a whole effort by Pope and Young at the time to, keep crossbows out of archery seasons and such. So they worked on putting together an ASTM standard for a hunting bow and arrow, and what does that actually mean? And so that apparently was all done. I don't know to what level the ASTM standard is being leveraged. Just throwing it out there, but it's sort of an international standards body that records standards, so you can get ASTM standards on all kinds of things. It's American Society for Testing and Materials. And again, coming from an engineering and product design background, those folks were really focused on trying to put a standard definition in place that would help guide the industry as crossbows started to enter into the archery seasons and all the conflicts started. So largely the Pope and Young Club, I've been a member of the club since the early 90s. Their position has never wavered on that. They've kind of leveraged that definition, and there's sort of a whole bunch of history there. So that's what I know about that.
That's awesome. I just posted the link to SAMI, which is Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute, which sounds like the equivalent. I know there's some questions coming up about minimum calibers for certain species. I imagine that if it's coming up in a couple states, it'll start to spread as well. SAMI has the ANSI standards, the international standards. That's our organization in the United States that helps regulate on ammunition and calibers and all of that jazz. So if you want to geek out on that side or need some questions there, that would be an awesome link, just like on the archery side. There's technical aspects of this that are really helpful. I'm glad you brought that up. Really cool. Well, we're closing in on 9 minutes, Sawyer. What are you thinking here? Is there one final point you want to bring up? Or any other questions to share?
I think that kind of, you know, covers. I'd love to hear if there's any folks who, there any area or policy issues that folks could use help on, and to see if we can't, if anyone else on the call might have some resources or ideas.
I'm not going to let it lie. Blaze pink. I know it came up in Wisconsin. I think there's a couple other states.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
bunch, mostly in the Midwest, I think.
Yeah, it was passed here in Washington too.
Yeah, so that one is one that I fought super hard on because Blaze Pink is just dumb. What's wrong with orange? The reason that they did it was apparently to make women feel comfortable getting in the outdoors and hunting, because, you know, clearly our only barrier to entry to hunting is that we can't wear pink in the field. Oh God. So I fought against that one a lot. But once I actually looked at the study, it appears that they discovered that pink actually does stand out more than blaze orange, especially in the fall when the leaves are turning. So I'm not super against blaze pink anymore, as long as people are wearing it for the right reasons. And that's just something that I get on my soapbox about, because as a woman who faced many barriers to entry, the color of my clothing never crossed my mind. So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, and I ran an informal kind of a just recreational study on this when this was being talked about in Washington, because I have my own personal opinions about it. I feel it's condescending. I don't personally think it's a good thing in terms of this, to what you speak of, Kristen. And so we had a Sportsman's Warehouse has a ladies' night they host every year, and we always participate in that. And so there was kind of this question going around that night in one store in one place in Washington about blaze or pink, and most of the women there who hunted and fished felt that it was kind of condescending and silly. But, you know, Realtree kind of led the charge on integrating pink camo and some of that. And that's kind of where I think a lot of it started. I don't think there's anything wrong with it scientifically. If it's great, another color that works, that's great. I don't have a problem with that. But I feel like it's kind of offensive to think that, you know, because you're a girl, you're going to wear pink. Like, my daughter thinks the whole idea is absolutely stupid. Now, what I will say on the other side of that is, thank God for companies like Proas and She Camo and some of these others that are putting out women's cut fit clothing. I think that is a bigger barrier. Putting a teenage girl in some dude's pants is kind of silly. So I'm really happy to see that the camo industry or the manufacturers in those spaces are addressing the needs of women and putting out really high-end clothing that are, you know, on par with what men have, you know, the option to use.
Yeah, Tom, you nailed it. And I was just going to add that, you know, if the pink was marketed to men and women, I think it would be a different story. But the marketing techniques are obviously aimed at women. And, you know, what's wrong with men wearing pink? So there's a lot of psychology and maybe sociology that goes into that whole thing that I won't get into right now, even though sociology is my jam. But yeah, I mean, the bigger issue is women finding clothes that we can actually wear, regardless of what color or camo pattern it is. So it's really nice to see women's cut clothing coming out. Samantha, I know you were super excited about the backpacks that came out a few months ago that were like specifically designed for women. We had some long conversations about that. So
I can get really geeked out about equipment because I have hips, and we can go into that later. But in general, I mean, the conversation we're having and the different points that have come up are demonstrating, a couple things to me. One, things are changing, and policy, while it was maybe a less pursued effort for R3 efforts, is now increasing, and it seems to be making some of the larger changes we can make without doing programs and most cost efficient, right? So even when we're curtailed by COVID in our activities, we can still look at our policies and regulations. It also seems like that while we bring in new audience bases, our, let's say our policies might change a little bit. I think it was, Matt, you brought up crossbows for permanent injury. I can see crossbows, the push for them becoming more and more as our core group of hunters that are in their certain generation of age are going to age, and so the equipment is going to be a huge thing, and even access. I mean, there's so many aspects to this. So these are interesting conversations. I love, Sawyer, that you brought up the point about making sure we're checking our biases and the input from Corin about the surveys and everything. I guess I'll leave it for one last point, just in general on policy as we hit the 3 o'clock hour. And that's make sure you understand your organization's role and opportunity to get involved in this. Don't get ahead of your leadership, but also keep your eye out for efforts to address R3 through policy, because it gives you a chance to get engaged in some different efforts, maybe build some internal and external partnerships, and have a greater impact with maybe the same amount of hours as other strategies do. So don't forget about it. Keep it in mind. Talk to your peers and colleagues and see if there's anything around that you might be able to talk about. And let us know how we can help. We have a lot of states connected working on different issues. Sawyer did a great job of showing how industry, our trade associations, and our nonprofits like SCI and Congressional Sportsman Foundation, they're working on topics all the time. So you have colleagues out there too that aren't necessarily your event coordinators, but they're a whole other section that could provide you on the growth. So know those are there. Thanks for joining us for the conversation. Sawyer, awesome job in adapting and leading this, and Kristen as well. We'll have our next conversation at the R3 Forum. So when you go to tune in, make sure you test your tech ahead of time. And if you have any questions, get a hold of us. Any last words, Sawyer?
Oh, thank you all for joining.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes.